Well, okay. First and everything, thanks to Archie for saying me to do this. Before anything, I never did something like this, so this can go wrong or good. So, well, so this is a third meetup. I will be, as Archie say, mostly talking a bit about like what I think are kind of like the core concepts needed to get into some stuff of security, and also in the end of it, I will discuss a bit from my own experience how I feel different hack the box with, for example, the OSCP certification. Before starting, please become one with the mute button, so there is no any kind of noise. So from here, well, yeah. Kwame, my nickname ceso, but my name is Leandro. I am from Uruguay. I love to climb. Also, I am a Linux DevOps engineer and a cybersec enthusiast, and I love cheese. That's something really great from Netherlands, by the way. Well, as I said, to give a bit of insight about my background, I have been working now since 2014 as a Linux sysadmin DevOps engineer. Most of the stuff I know is for being autodidact, so self-teaching. Currently, I hold, well, that is expired the Red Hat Certification System Administrator, the Solutions Architect of AWS, and in the last few months, I got my OSP. As a lot of you here as well, I just started now with security, so I don't have any working experience, but I am sure that I could share some kind of the background that you also have, like working with Linux or doing DevOps stuff. That yeah. Until which part do you hear? Well,
you were at OSCP.
Yeah, that. Thanks. Then that, yeah, I got to approve my USP some months ago, and it's kind of, I just started to play like with HTB like ends mids of November, and in January I was like, okay, I will try to go to the OSP. I look at it as a fun challenge, and it really was. So now I will tell you more or less what do I think are like the basic concepts. At least you need to have a little bit of idea to being able to get started. So part of that is having a bit of knowledge about Linux, like for example, how the user, how is the scheme of permissions, like how is all the interaction with user permissions, if there are special permissions, or the process in Linux itself, and also at least something that is quite important is at least a tip of idea on the iceberg about networking, like having a little idea about subnetting, TCP/UDP, these protocols, what is the three-way handshake, a little insight about how DNS works, and also some idea about HTTP, because a lot of the times, most of the vector of attack are through web applications. So it's important to have at least a solid concept about HTTP. So from here, Linux, more than anything, to go like fast on this, you have users and groups. Every user has assigned something called a user ID, which is basically the identifier of that user. And the same happens with groups. It has the group ID, the key ID. All the information related to users is described in the HC passwd config file, and the one for groups is in the H groups. Some years ago, all the information about, for example, the passwords were in the HC passwd, but at some moment they were put directly in the etc shadow where the passwords are stored, defined as a hash. I will not touch too much how is the format of the configuration in that file, because that's something that, for example, you can do doing a man passwd or just googling. So, because yeah, this is more like the general idea. And something that is important as well is that there is a file called nswitch.conf that there is described exactly in which order the users or the groups are being obtained. Why? Because at least in business environments, it's not normal to have defined local users, but instead it's normal to have them defined in external servers like an LDAP service or an Active Directory. So in switch, in the case of Linux, there is defined, okay, if I want to know the information of the user Peteco, it's going to be defined which file is going to be first looked up after, the HTTP passwd, or it's going to be done a query against LDAP. So it's good to have in mind that that file exists. The permissions is basically, you have three permissions, basically, that is read, write, and execution. They are self-described. And you can look at them as decimal numbers, where each decimal number is a binary number, because one of them defines which permission is assigned to a certain file or directory. For example, in the example that there is there in the presentation, you can see that the 0 represents 000. So that means that there is no read, write, or execution. If there is a 5 for the permission, there is a, it means that the file or the direction has rights of read and execution, but not write. 6, for example, represents an 1 the 110 read, write, but not execution. So the number is described between 0 and 7 in binary, but with that conversion of decimal. And also the permissions can be defined either to the user owner of a file directory, the group owner of that file directory, or others. The user is described with a U, the group with a G, and the author with an O. In order to change the permission, for example, over a file or a directory, is used the command chmod for change mode. That, as I said, you can specify stuff with the U, for example, the user U plus rw and full txt. It means that the file user, the file full txt is going to have permissions of read and write assign it to the user owner. So if Peteco is the user owner of food.txt, it's going to have read and write permissions. Now, here it comes also the possibility that you can use decimal numbers, because you can specify permissions for the user, the group, and the author and authors at the same time in a really easy way. So for example, the 601 is going to assign read write for the user owner, is not going to assign any kind of permissions to the group, the group owner, and as well is going to assign only execution for other users. For change the owner of the group, because the group is like, for example, Peteco, J. Perez, Robert, they belong to the group, I don't know, test1. If a directory, for example, has permissions of test1, then all of these users are going to have those permissions. The same applies, but only for a user. To change the owner of a directory or a file, is just change chown, like which is short for change owner, and you specify first one of the many syntax. It just specify the user, the two dots, and the group, and after that, the name of the file or the directory. Something important to know as well is that besides this basic permission, there are permissions, the special permissions, the suite, the skid, and the sticky bit. The suite, basically what it does is it gives special permissions, like a permission of execution as the user owner of that file. For example, the command passwd, for you to be able to change your own password, is that that binary is sounded by root. So normally you will not have permissions to execute that binary unless the sweep permission is assigned on that binary. That's why a normal user can execute passively, for example, because it can execute the passively in his own environment as if it was root. The skid is basically the same, but it's applied to groups instead of the user. The sticky bit is another special permission that what it does is apply onto directories and makes that only the user owner of a file can delete that file. For example, in the directory TMP, the temporal, it's like everyone can put their files there normally, unless you change that configuration. But only the user that created those files is going to have permissions to delete it. So how do you also notice if these permissions are enabled? That's easy, which is like in the case of the suite, it's like if there is an S instead of an X in the section of user, then that means that the user, then that means that the binary has the suite enabled. If in the section of the group it has enabled an S, then it's the same. The skid is enabled for that binary. And for the skid is if there is no X in the section of authors, then it's going to be there a T. And the case of these special permissions is important because, for example, if there are suite binaries, that could be a lot of times a vector to do privilege escalation. Like, for example, let's say then, I don't know, well, lmap, for example, the command lmap, let's say that is enabled with a SUI, then that means that a normal user is going to be able to execute lmap with as if it was root. That is a vector to privilege escalation because, for example, you can pass the flag of interactive, and from that you can just get a shell, so it's quite easy, and you will be root, which is not good. Well, depending. If you are the attacker, it is. Another basic concept of Linux that is important to know is the process, because first than anything, every process it exists as a file. More files, and those are like assigned to a file descriptor, and every process has assigned to it more files. Let's say a web server like Apache is going to have open files like socket files, or for example log files. So it's something good to know because sometimes you can get a bit more information about that process just looking at what files it does have open. As well, another things, every process is run with a specific user. So for example, you always want to have a specific user for run a server, because you don't want to, for example, give a left Apache running as root, because if the Apache is compromised, that means the person is going to have quite easy a root in case there is an exploit to do the privilege escalation on, or even just get some interaction at the OS level. So always you will find that always there is some specific user and not a root or a normal user with with higher privileges to run that. And you can see the process that is running, like for example, typing ps fouts. That is going to give you a list with information about the process that is running, who is the user owner, which one is the parent process as well, for example, in a tree way. So that's pretty useful. Or top minus cd1 that is going to show you like updates of all the process running in real time. From here, so that's kind of a little bit of Linux that I think personally is like a must know. There enters also, of course, some stuff as being comfortable using the terminal or having some idea about bash, but that is easy to find any kind of tutorial. So this was more like a bit of insight. From here, the networking also like following the same idea. That first thing that is needed to know is about an IP, which is basically it's a and I'm going to only mention IPv4. That, for example, you will have an address like 192, 168, 10.10. And it's important to know that, for example, the first portion, in this case, that the subnet mask is 2055, 2000, blah, blah. That means that when you convert the number, that IP, into binary, it means how many bits are going to be covered. Why? Because it will determine how many hosts can exist in that range of address. For example, in this case, if you see here, it's like the mask is covering the the first 3 octets. So that means that you are going to have 255 English 255 IP address available. So it's important to know that normally, based on the mask, you will know if you are working with the entire net or a specific host. So you need to being able to differentiate that kind of stuff. Another thing as well is the three-way TCP handshake. That basically is you have the TCP protocol that is one of the network protocols that works with IP that is reliable. So the idea is that if, for example, there is a connection and one packet is lost, that packet is going to be resent until all the information is being transmitted. And basically, a 3CP way handshake, what it does is like it sends a package saying to the receiver, saying, hey, like I want to talk with you. Then in that case, there is going to be, if the receiver got that scene, it's going to send back a message saying as seen as a saying like, which will be like, hey, I got your message. I know you want to talk with me. So I am aware of that. Then the sender again sends an ASIC like acknowledgement, like, okay, I know that you are aware that I want to talk with you. So after this three-way TCP handshake takes place, then is when this connection starts. And this is also important because without the networking, you can't, for example, have an idea how exactly is the information being transmitted in a connection, or for example, in which, if you are looking at a capture with Wireshark, for example, it is totally needed. From there on, there is also UDP that, as I said, TCP is a protocol more like reliable. So there is all this stuff of congestion control, also, congestion control, no, error codes like to control if the message was sent, blah, blah. And also you have UDP, that is another, but in this case, the image describes it pretty okay, because in UDP, it's just like the message are sent. So there is no like, okay, I know you want to talk with me. There is not going to be any kind of retransmission. If the packets get lost, they get lost. Normally, most of the applications tend to work on TCP, but there are some protocols, like, for example, DNS, that I will talk a little bit in a few slides. UDP, for example, works on the 53, yeah, in the 53 port, sorry, my English, that works in the 53 UDP. And for example, the new protocol of HTTP3, it also works on UDP. It doesn't on TCP. So it's like you will have some protocols. So always scan also UDP, because maybe you lost some information because you didn't scan UDP. The short description of DNS, well, I mentioned that there is an IP, which is the direction of a host, but as you know, there is normally like www.google.com. That in the underhood is like is a query of the DNS protocol that basically is like, okay, this IP belongs to this domain. So in the underhood, a lot of stuff happen going with servers that says in the end, like, okay, the www.google.com belongs to 1111, for example, 1.1.1. That conversion takes place, and getting an idea about this is important because, for example, if you are working with a you are trying to do some web application testing, there is something called subdomains that basically, let's say that you have www.google.com, for example, that is in some specific IP. And let's say that you have gmail.google.com. That is like, is still under the domain of google.com, but it's a subdomain. And for example, it could be possible that they share the same IP. So it's needed to have a way to identify as well in the website, in the reverse proxy, for example, or a load balancer, how to identify which of those servers is the one you the connection wants to get as a target. Because if it's just like the IP, yeah, it's going to hit this IP, but it's not going to know to which subdomain. So you utilize something called virtual host that based on the on a header, on the HTTP header, is going to determine to which backend is going to do it's going to get that connection to the connection. The configuration of DNS servers in Linux is in resolve.conf. That basically what it specifies is which ones are the resolvers of DNS you are going to have. Also in the etc host, that there is defined, like for example, one-to-one host IP. For example, something that is the standard to have always there is the local host, that is the 127.0.0.1. Or for example, if you have some local thing, you also do it there. And switch is important here as well, because in switch is defined as well in which order the information of a host is going to be determined. Because, for example, there is you normally will have, like for example, first to know this IP, go to this DNS server, or for example, in the normal is like go to the etc host. If the server is there, then take this IP. If there is nothing, then go to the external DNS servers to resolve it. Or for example, it could also be with some if I remember, stuff like API of Red Hat. It also, you can put the in some way integrate LDAP, or I don't remember at all, but it's important to know that file exists. That's an example of what I was saying about the virtual host. That, for example, www example is, both of them are associated with the same IP, but they are different web pages, or even in the internal network, they can be different backends. But the public IP they are facing, in this case, just a private IP, but okay, could be the same. So so far, then something about a little bit of Linux, a little bit of networking, and I also touched a bit of HTTP. So now a bit more in depth, that basically HTTP is the protocol that you use every day in a web page. Hypertext transfer protocol normally is running behind the TCP/80 port, or is normally found as an alternative 8080 port. For example, Tomcat or Shavels use it as the default. Sorry. The webs have a huge, quite large surface of attack due on how the applications are built, that there is used this framework or this library, and maybe this library is using this another one. So a lot of the times could be that maybe a third external framework or library can have a vulnerability. So the fact that they are using this is going to already implicate that that vulnerability exists, as well as the applications are done, is likely possible as well to place there some vulnerabilities. That is, so you have cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgeries, SQL injection. So there's a lot. I recommend you after this to go to Google and read about the OWASP 10, the top 10 of OWASP. That is basically the top 10 common vulnerabilities in webs. And also HTTP per se is an insecure protocol, so the information goes in plain text. That's why it's used as HTTPS, that makes basically with certificates and certificates authorities that emit those certificates, like GoDaddy, HeoTrust, or using free something like Encrypt, that the connection information between the client and the server is going to be ciphered. So you can, if you are capturing traffic of something that is ciphered, you are not going to be able to decipher the traffic unless you have the key. The HTTP headers to show you, for example, tend to look something like this. This is I'm using my blog because it doesn't have so many stuff. But as an example, for example, you tend to an HTTP request header tends to have like the method is being used, the version of HTTP, also the host with this specific parameter. And the request header is how the reverse balance, the reverse proxy, the load balancer, whatever is in front in public face, is going to determine which is the server behind that is going to get the connection. Also, some stuff like the user agent, that the user agent, what identifies is which browser, for example, you are using to go to that website. So, for example, Firefox, Chrome, or even if you are using a phone, or if it's a bot crawler. So that's identified with the user agent. Also, some other stuff like the what to do with the some parameters that are used with the caches in the case that, for example, there is a content delivery network in order to reduce latency and another stuff. Is there are quite a lot of different parameters. And you also have the response header. So the request header is the one that is sent to the server when you are going to initiate a connection, a request to that server. And the response is what the server sends back once you have a reply. In this case, for example, you have the version of the HTTP, as well the message code of HTTP saying how was the result of that reply. Also, what's the status of the connection? For example, copy a keep alive, in this case is a close. And as well, another stuff related to cache, blah, blah, blah. For example, also here you can see that this was done via Varnish. So in this case, GitHub is using Varnish. You can also get information, for example, about which server is running some web application. As I said, there are like the error codes of HTTP, which are divided basically in 5. One is the information responses that go from 100 to 199, the successful responses that go from 200 to 299, the redirects that go from 300 to 339, and the same goes for the client and the server errors. So, for example, about those errors, it's like you have, for example, the 100 that is a continuous. So basically, is that the connection went okay. The server replies that, and it's basically you can continue the connection you have, or you can just close it. You have the 200, which means okay. Let's say, for example, you requested a photo in our server. If that photo is found, the server is going to reply with the content of that photo, and as well with that 200, okay, because the request was processed successfully, the photo was found. An example also of redirects, for example, in another case, is the 301 that is moved permanently. So let's say you before at some moment the web page was, I don't know, example.com, and in some moment you changed the web page to a new domain that is the example.net, for example. You are going to configure in your server, in the what's in the facing the internet, that if this old web URL is hit, then give to the client that initiated the connection the 301 move permanently and give the new location. So if I try to go to example.com, I will get a response saying 301, and the new location that is going to be the example.net, and my browser is going to automatically redirect me to that new location. You also have the, as a client error, for example, you have the 401 that is unauthorized. That means that in order to get that resource the client is requesting, first it needs to authenticate before to proceed. And the server error that you have, for example, the 504, 504, that is a gateway timeout. That basically, let's say you have something working as a proxy or a red balancer, and let's say you have this system here, your client gets from here, your backend is here, the connection between those servers, for example, could get a timeout. So the server you are actually, the web server you are actually requesting that resource can have some latency or whatever between in that middle, and it's going to meet a gateway timeout. For example, a web server and a database, if a query is too large, or let's say that the data, the timeout of the request ends before the database gives the result of that query. So that is going to give a gateway timeout, for example. Now covered a little bit of like the tip of that iceberg that is everything. More or less like the phases of pentest that could be divided like in information gathering. That is basically you are starting, you define your target, what do you want to attack. You start going to public sources like Google or using the protocol WHOIS, etc., in order to get all the information you can about that target. Like, for example, harvesting emails or telephone numbers and so on. You after that have the service enumeration, that I will say this is the critical phase and the most important one, because here is where you will be covering everything from network scanning, recognition of technologies that are being used as it is the servers or the frameworks, the language being used, etc. So the version, the software that is running, also doing some like manual web exploration. So let's say you go to the web page you want to attack and you start clicking everything, trying to see what's the behavior, also reading the code that you can see the source in the browser. This is the critical phase, because what you do here is what you later will utilize in order to exploit the target. So I would say that, I don't know, you will spend like 70% of the time in service enumeration, or 60%, something in those lines. So always enumerate, 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 enumerate. And if you think you are already enumerated enough, keep enumerating, because for sure you will find something new. Later, once you already have like enough information, you, let's say, recognize that the web application is using an old framework that has a vulnerability that allows to do a remote code explosion for execution, sorry. Then here is when you do the penetration, that you take like a public exploit, or you craft your own exploit for that vulnerability. So you get, you take advantage of that vulnerability to accomplish something. Like, for example, the remote code execution, or let's say starting to leak information of that system, etc. Later, let's say you compromise a web server and you got some users, or even a user at OSCP level. You want to maintain access in there, because you don't know if, for example, the user you just got now is deleted, or the user, you steal the cookie of user password, whatever, and it's changed it, or so you want to try, you don't want to be kicked out. So this is like, for example, from creating your own users, putting there like some key for you, as also creating backdoors so you can enter later. Like, for example, starting a rootkit or malware. An example of a rootkit, for example, could be, I don't know, you take the command, let's say ls, but let's say you replace the original ls in the system for one you did, that every time it's executed, on top of doing the normal functionality, is also going, for example, to keep a check that there is a backdoor for a user of yours, or every time it's executed, it executes some task on the background, or whatever. And later the house cleaning, that is like once you accomplish it, all what's your scope, what you need to do is that you try to clean all your tracks, basically take care of your ass that no one noticed you were there. Those are more or less the phases of penetrate of the pen test. You of course can deep inside them and go like deeper, starting to go divide them, like for example scanning or doing like web brute force directories and so on. An example of service enumeration you can do with network scanning is to find the ports that are being used, the protocols they are running, or even a version of a server. For example, using Nmap, that here is an example using like a quick scan listing the top 100 ports, or for example doing a full scan that is going to scan like using scripts to detect known vulnerabilities version, try to match that information. The manual exploration is what they say, like you start doing checking, for example, if there is a road.txt file that is going to have defined which path on the server you are able to request, because when this file exists, it's mostly used, for example, that crawlers like Google, for example, Bing, don't get inside certain files. So if that file is disallowed for a bot, then it's something you would like to look after it. Also, the stuff I said before, like checking the web source, clicking stuff, etc. Or the brute force directories, like using tools like GoBuster or Tierbuster in order to see which interesting files are on the web. For example, there could be some script, db.php, config.php, and those files are interesting to look after. And the most important thing over everything is Googleful. Like, if you are all the time doing enumeration, you are also all the time doing some Googleful, trying to look if you find some vulnerability about something, or which information you find, or maybe you just discovered a new protocol that is being used, or a technology you don't know. So you will just spend a lot of time Google, for example, trying to learn all the much you can about that technology that is being used, to being able to know how to exploit it. So good flow with is even most important than service enumeration itself, because you can determine how quick you get something or not. So good flow is like all. Well, being say more or less that, hack the box versus OSP. I haven't done too much hack the box. Hack the box. I just started doing some machines, as I said, the beginning in November, more or less. And in January, I started with OSP. But from my point of view and my own personal experience, like hack the box is more like, yeah, it's more CTF, like capture the flag. While OSP tends to be like a lot of CVS. So it's like you get a target, you scan it, you do some service enumeration, you found that this service, that this software that is being used has this CVE, blah, 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 associated. So you go to Google, and 99% of the time you will find a public exploit for that, or at least a public POC describing what do you need to do. While in the case of hack the box, it tend to be more like misconfigurations or some automated task that you need to catch it, or doing strings on some kind of binary to know, to see if there is something interesting hidden. So that's more or less the difference between the labs of hack the box and OSP. And as well, OSP is quite different because it introduces the concept of pivot, network pivoting, that basically is like you have net 1, net 2, net 3, and they say that all that is in net 3 can see what is in net 2, but net 2 can't see what is net 3, and the same with the 1. The 1 only can, the 1 can't see any net, but net 2 can see net 1. So in that case, it's like you in OSP, you will need to do some service pivoting, like, for example, exploiting a machine that is in a different network from a compromising machine in another one, or using like a second network, like a gateway, to get stuff done with the third another network. So it's like you need to do a lot of that stuff, which is quite interesting. Like, for example, also, let's say that you compromise a machine that is communicated with one in another network. You put cross-site scripting in this machine, you compromise in net 1, you compromise the machine in net 2, but to get, let's say, a higher user, you exploit that cross-site scripting that you just crafted before. So that's quite funny, because it makes you to start, you need to have more clear the concepts about networking in this case. And as well, it's like you have dependencies between machines. So let's say if you want to compromise the machine 1, 2, 3, you first need to compromise the machine 1. So it's not like hack the box per se itself, that is like, okay, this is the machine I want to break, and I do everything until I break it. Okay, continue with the next one. Blah. No, in the labs of speed, there's dependency, which is also quite nice, because it introduces as well the concept of looting. So it's like, okay, it doesn't stop. The game doesn't stop when you compromise the machine. So it's like, okay, yeah, I compromise it, but let's see if I can find passwords, some confidential information, emails, which machines are connected to this one. So that's quite funny to do as well, because it's like a detective work as well, because you are looking for clues that could help you with another stuff later. Uh, well, so it's like, it's kind of different itself. I would say that hack the box is way harder than OSP, because that I say, with OSP you will always, most of the time, you will find something public, public exploit. While hack the box, it indeed makes you to think outside the box, trying to discover what's the way to have some vector. So they are different. Both of them are really funny. So I would advise you, just if you want to do OSP, just do it. It's a really nice journey, pretty funny to do, and you can challenge yourself all the time with, I want to break this machine, and I can continue until I do this. So it's a really nice experience. I recommend it. um, Something really important with OSP: not try harder, but keep trying harder, because you will get times that it's like you feel like the world is falling over you, because you can find nothing. Um, you just need to keep trying, because you will find something. In my case, with my exam, I didn't got enough points until around 16 hours of the exam, or 14, something like that, and I ended up having 90 points. So it's like, don't get in panic or anxiety if you feel that you are losing, because you still have plenty of time to do it. Just try to focus and enjoy it. And something I didn't mention as well is that personally, also something that is security is something that has like a lot of interaction and overlapping with a lot of different areas on IT, like is database administrations, developing system administration, network administration. So it's quite easy to get to feel overwhelmed with all that bunch of information, because it's a lot. You need to know a lot of different areas. Uh, in my case, my way to deal with that is like, uh, it works in everyone, but at least maybe can help you my way as well. It's like, if I want to, let's say, no, I am trying to break this thing, and I hit a new concept that I need to know for break this. It's like, I make a stop, take this new concept, go learn everything I can about this concept, and after that I came back and continue. So like some sort of thinking, developing, like they call to a function that in my case is learn about this thing, and after that I came back from where I was, because I feel it more comfortable in that way. and I don't feel that overwhelming because, oh no, I need to learn this, and this before I'm able to this another thing. But that's personal, but could be useful as well for you. I put here a bit of resources. 0xDF that I found it are really his write-ups are quite good. Also videos of IPsec. Those two things are really nice to learn new stuff or watching different ways to think about something. I also put the OSCP cheat sheet I made during I was doing the course that could be also helpful for you as well. I used it as well during the exam. If you want to read a bit more the insight about the OSCP itself, for not go too long on this, you also can read the post I made about it. And of course, the Tishinul guide of preparation of for PWK OSP, because he goes really deep about stuff and dividing which resources to look after depending on which area of the course it is. Well, that's all. Time to hack. I thought about three machines, two that are quite easy. One is Bashet, that is a Linux one, and Sherry, that is a Windows one. And if you want to have a bit more fun, there is Magic, that is a medium Linux machine. Well, happy hacking, and thanks for all the fish. That's all.
Thank you, man. Thank you. That was awesome, especially for first time. That was really, really good. So normally I would give you an applause. So why not? There we go.
Thanks.
From me to you. And normally we end with the all important question. Does anybody have a question for Leandro?
I forget that, sorry.
That's okay. That's why you have me, right? Well, the dog thinks that's quite interesting. I don't know if you hear the dog. There's, I guess, no questions. There's some remarks in the presentation about virtually clapping for you. So that's very good. Right, there's some test. Thank you for the presentation. And the rest of us also thank you, of course. So
thanks
if there's,
to you for the space.
Yeah, very welcome. Again, at first time, I thought it was amazing what you did. Thank you for that. It's also time to actually announce the presentation for next week, and next month. We will have a presentation about hunting for CVEs by our Discord member, Viserion. He actually is in the process of getting his first CVE assigned to him. So I hope that works out. But he's going to share his techniques and tips on actually getting or finding bugs that are worth a CVE. So that should be a very interesting presentation next time.